But our passage today kind of brings together some things that may be looming through the first two chapters and explain a little bit about what's going on here, and clearly defines for us that there are some issues that are going to happen here in just a little bit. Esther chapter 3, starting in verse 1. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote. And you say, well, that's wonderful. Because when we left in chapter 2, there was somebody who saved his life, and he was very grateful, and he made a big deal out of writing it in the book of the Chronicles. And of course, that's going to come up later when they get out his kingly book, because he can't sleep and he reads about what happened. But what's so interesting about this is we're all sitting here thinking, yay, Mordecai's about to get a promotion. And of course, that isn't what happens. Instead, we get introduced to the bad guy, Haman. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. He's promoted. After these things, you would think that the good guy would get promoted, but it's not the person that we always expect. And one of the important things that I think that God's trying to get across to us right here as we get started with this whole account of how this man wants to wipe out an entire nation and what God goes through to prevent it. He sets the scene with this simple phrase here at the beginning of verse 1. Because our mind, Mordecai did what was right. He should get promoted. He should be appreciated. He should be. But one of the things that we have to learn is that life is unfair sometimes. And if you're going to get bogged down in that, then you're going to have a lot of problems. But I think more importantly than understanding that life is unfair sometimes is understanding that God's timing is rarely our timing. And God's timing most definitely is not the world's timing. And so while Ahasuerus, for whatever reason here, and notice the lack of details, we don't know how much time has passed. We don't know really much of anything about Haman. What did he do to get promoted? It just says that after these things, for whatever reason, King Ahasuerus decides to promote Haman. And that's the way the world works. It's not the way God works. It's not often the way we would want things to work. No, but it is the way that the world works. And when you understand that, you're better off for it. We have no idea how long it has been. The next clue that we're going to get as to time period is going to happen down here after the trouble with Mordecai in verse 7, where it says in the first month of the 12th year of King Ahasuerus. So we know that some time has passed because now we're in the 12th year, and we know it's going to take a while before the plan gets hatched, and we'll talk about that next week. There's the worldly thinking why it takes that long, and then there's God has plenty of time to work behind the scenes and move things around as he will. The important thing that you realize here is that Haman is promoted above all the princes. He's his Ahasuerus or Xerxes, whichever name you want to use for him, right-hand man or second in command, you could say. You've got all of these other important people. And think of the pomp and circumstance. You always have to remember the introduction. 6-month feast, princes from the 127 provinces, all these important people have been gathered together, and now years have passed, and for whatever reason, Haman gets promoted above all these guys, all right? And so he has a lot of authority. He has a lot of respect. He has a lot of power. He has a lot of, most importantly, persuasion with the king. Because even though people look at him and think that he tends to have a lot of power in those days rose and fell with the king. And so you could get upset about something, and we're going to see that Haman does. He gets very, very upset here in just a little bit. But there's not really a whole lot that he can do about it until he persuades the king. But one of the important details that we see here in this verse, and one of the reasons that I say you have to keep remembering that God is working behind the scenes to accomplish his will. If you want to propose a huge plan like he's going to here in a little bit, then you have to be an important person. It's not okay if you're captain of some military in the 124th province that happens to be how many days or how many weeks or how many months journey away from the palace. Because if you had gotten upset and you wanted to pull off, a coup, if you would, against the Jewish people and try to exterminate them, you can't be far removed from the person who can do that. And so God is telling us that for whatever reason, we don't know, it tells us it's not at all important to the narrative. And we don't know at what time this happened, which also tells us it's not important to the narrative. Only thing that's important is that here is a man, Haman, that we are being introduced to, and for whatever reason, Ahasuerus has advanced him and made him second in command. And now we know there's a Haman, and he all of a sudden has become really important because he's close to the king and he has a lot of persuasion with the king. If he didn't have persuasion with the king, he probably wouldn't be second in command. And if it probably wasn't a lot of persuasion with the king that made him second in command, it probably would have been important to the narrative, and so there would have been a comment about it. You see what's happening here? This guy has kind of schmoozed his way in with the king, probably. Not necessarily that he is in and of what he does important, or a great man of character, as we're going to see he's not. But there's not really a whole lot of information, except the other thing that's important here in verse 1 is the problem that is presented. You say, I don't see a problem. Well, the problem is actually found in one word, and you might not recognize it, but you might. Anybody know what an Agagite is? As soon as I saw this, I thought, is this a reference to? No, wait a minute, that can't be, because they're all dead. And then why are they calling them Agagites instead of? Because the rest of the Bible, they are referred to by another term that as soon as I say it, you're going to know really well. But an Agagite is an intentional reference in the word here to a very long-term problem that is going on, and it is about to become front and center and the whole reason for the book of Esther. The whole promoting of Esther to queen, the whole moving Mordecai into a position in the gates, and the whole promoting of Haman to be in an extremely elite position, it all rolls around the word Agagite. It is a descendant of Agag, who was king of the Amalekites. Now, you probably, if we were to do some Bible trivia, more than likely you would be on top of this. Now, 1 Samuel 15, Saul was supposed to wipe them all out, right? And he saved the king, and he saved the best of the animals, and then Samuel had to hack the king in pieces. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But I want you to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 25, because Deuteronomy chapter 25 refers to what is already a long-standing feud that has been going on. It's amazing to me how many long-standing feuds the Jewish nation has, because every Muslim nation's been going at them for years now. There has been bad blood that is recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 17 through 19. Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when ye were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way, and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God hath given thee rest from all thine enemies round about, in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Thou shalt not forget it. All right? Now, the reason I wanted to turn here first is because there are a couple very important clues that are given to us here in this passage. The first one is, God specifically tells them in verse 17, you should remember what Amalek did unto you when you were come out of Egypt. All right? They have come out of Egypt. They are excited because God is delivering them. But they have been slaves. They don't have an army. They're not really equipped for travel. Now, the Egyptians gave them a lot of stuff when they left. But they have just started on their journey, and Amalek attacks them. And he doesn't do it in a very nice way. The description here is he attacked the hindmost part. If you have 1 million or 1.5 million people stretched out and they're traveling through the desert, who are going to be the ones at the back? Oh, we are, because our knees are shot and our hips are hurting, and right? I mean, it's the sicker ones, it's the older ones, it's the slower ones, it's the ones that are going to have a hard time traveling. And so here they are bringing up the rear, and that's exactly what he says. You smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee. And feeble is not a term that is talking down about them. It's describing people who cannot hardly take care of themselves. In other words, these folks are having a hard enough time keeping up with the travel. It's wearing on them. They're not jumping in their car or their chariot and driving down the road. They're walking. And so here they are walking through the desert, and these are the ones that are tired and wore out and having a hard time. And the Amalekites attack them. I'm just going to tell you that's a cowardly act. If you're going to attack somebody, I mean, maybe it's smart from the Amalekites' perspective to attack from the back and make people come running back through them and cause the most. But it's kind of a cowardly act to kill a whole bunch of folks who can't hardly keep up with the travel and let alone defend themselves. This whole account happens in Exodus chapter 17, and we're going to turn there in just a minute. But before we do, I want to share one more thought with you. Because this passage here, God tells them to remember it, but he also includes some information that's very, very important that tells us about the mindset of the Amalekites. And it's found here in verse 18. He describes them attacking them feeble, and when you were faint, and when you were weary. And then you have this last phrase, and he feared not God. In other words, the nation of Amalek feared not God. You remember when they come up to this great walled city, and the spies go in and they talk to Rahab, and Rahab says, listen, everybody around here has lost all their courage. They're about to die. They are just scared to death of what God's going to do, because they have already heard how God is taking care of y'all in crossing the Red Sea. Okay, if you attack the nation of Israel after they have crossed the Red Sea, and you have watched God drown the greatest military folks anywhere around in the Egyptians, there should have been a certain reverence and respect. And instead, these folks attack shortly thereafter, and God says, not Joshua, not Moses, not somebody else commentating on it, God says, you need to remember what they did to you. And in verse 18 he says, you also need to remember that they had no fear of me. And then verse 19, God says, I'm going to take care of these guys when you are settled in the land, and I have given you rest from all your enemies round about. So they're not going to be the first ones that you deal with when you get into the promised land. They're going to be one of the last ones that you deal with. when you get into the promised land. There's a lot of other things that are going to take place first. Jump to Exodus chapter 17 and look at the original situation here, because God does show up in a mighty way. So when he promises that he's going to take care of these guys, they should have taken it really seriously, considering what happens here. Starting in verse 8, it says, "Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, Choose us out men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in mine hand." So Joshua did as Moses had said and fought with Amalek, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. It came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon, and Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said unto Moses, Write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi, for he said, Because the Lord hath sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. We are introduced to a new name of God here, Jehovah Nissi, which means my banner. When you go to war, you carried a banner. The banner represented who you were. For most folks, it's the flag of the country that they fight for, right? Well, in this case, they weren't carrying an Israeli flag when they went to war. What they were saying is, when we go to war, we're carrying the banner of the person that fights for us, Jehovah Nissi. God is my banner. And so Joshua is supposed to be remembering this. And the nation of Israel would have been rehearsing this to the next generation, that the Amalekites are going to get their due in God's timing. And so then if you go to the passage in 1 Samuel, where they are dealing with it, in 15 I believe it is, they're supposed to destroy everybody. Now, let's go there real quickly. Let's look at the first couple of verses of that chapter. We're not going to go into great detail here. Samuel says unto Saul, The Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not. Couple of thoughts here. Samuel says unto Saul, you go and wipe out the Amalekites. The passage that we just came from, they said, Moses says, write this down and rehearse this in the ears of who? Joshua. That God said he is going to, because Moses is thinking that when Joshua goes into the promised land and they do what they're supposed to do and wipe everybody out, Joshua obviously is going to be the one that's leading the army that wipes out the Amalekites. How far are we removed from Joshua? The whole book of Judges. And now we're into the Kings, right? The first king. Before the nation of Israel is going to go and wipe out the Amalekites. It's delayed disobedience, delayed disobedience, delayed disobedience, over and over and over again. But now it's time, right? And if you wrote it in a book and you're supposed to be rehearsing it to Joshua and you're supposed to be telling the next generation, here Samuel comes to Saul and says, all right, it's time to do it. You go and wipe them out. Look at the directions. Spare them not. Slay both men and woman. That's not typical of battle, right? Infant and suckling. You are talking about the youngest of kids. There are young children, infants, and then those that are doing nothing but nursing, and he's saying, kill them all. The ox, the sheep, the camels, the donkeys. You can't get more of a description than to say all of the men, all of the women, down to the youngest baby, and every animal that they own. In other words, God said, I am going to remove them from remembrance under heaven. So here we are in Esther chapter 3, and you would have thought that Israel would have been excited to obey in 1 Samuel chapter 15. But apparently, they weren't so excited about it because they kept the king and they kept some of the other things, and we know that the king got hacked to pieces, and so you think, well, they must have utterly destroyed everybody. But I guess not, because here we are in Esther chapter 3, and you have a direct descendant of Agag. And notice it's not referred to as an Amalekite because the nation was destroyed. Go back to Esther chapter 3 and look at verse 8. No, sorry, I jumped too quickly. It was in 1 Samuel 15, verse 8. There is a word there that says, we have utterly killed all the people. And the Hebrew word for people means a people. In other words, a tribe, a nation. And so the nation of Israel thought that they have completely destroyed the Amalekites. But I guess they were so busy rounding up sheep and oxen that they weren't careful enough, because somebody from the king's family escaped, and they don't call them Amalekites anymore because the nation's gone. They just use the royal term. Agag was the royal term for an Amalekite, and so he is a direct descendant of the royal family of Agag. That's who Haman is. All right, now here we are. We have Haman, who has been promoted to an important role. You get to verse 2, and it says, and all the king's servants were in the king's gate, bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Then the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, why transgressest thou the king's commandment? In other words, you better have a really good reason for doing this, buddy. I mean, Ahasuerus is the one who said this, not Haman. And it came to pass when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand. In other words, every day he told them simply, I am a Jew. Why don't you bow to this guy? I'm a Jew. Why don't you bow to this guy? Because I'm a Jew. Why don't you bow? Day after day, when they keep asking him why he doesn't bow, his answer is, because I am a Jew. And so they go and they tell Haman, we'll get to that here in just a minute, because they want to see, well, is that a really good reason for disobeying the king's command? Now here's the understory. Who is Mordecai? In chapter 2, verse 5, the Bible told us that he was a son of Kish, a Benjamite. Why is that important? Anybody know what Saul was? You want to guess, right? In 1 Samuel 9, verses 1 and 2, it says, Saul, a Benjamite, son of Kish. So here's Mordecai, who is a direct descendant of Saul. And you have Haman, who is a direct descendant of Agag, king of the Amalekites. And Saul refused to kill Agag, so Samuel had to step in and hack him to pieces. And now here we are with a direct descendant and a direct descendant, and they have been brought into direct conflict with each other. And the world looks at it and says, well, it just so happens. But you can't read down through the first part of chapter 3 without realizing that God is particularly moving people in the places that he wants them to be to accomplish a promise that he made to the nation of Israel now a very, very long time ago. Because I'm sure while the nation of Israel has forgotten about this, guess who has not? God never, ever forgets his word. But we run into another situation here. Not only is Haman promoted, and not only is there a problem, but he is proud. King's command is simple. Everyone bow in reverence when Haman approaches. But Mordecai refuses to do so. Now, you speculate when you know the history. Is it because he realizes that if he is an Agagite, that he was an Amalekite, and certainly no good Benjamite would ever bow to an Amalekite? It seems that if that's true, then the Benjamites would have exterminated them for sure when they had the opportunity, because wasn't a Benjamite on the throne and had all the power to do so? But probably this is more from what we have learned already from Mordecai. This is religious standing, like in Daniel chapter 3 and chapter 6. Verse 3, the other officials are going to ask about his disobedience. And his only answer is, I am a Jew. Now, I've been trying to do some reading on this and figure out, because it says to bow and to reverence. And it's kind of interesting that it doesn't just say bow unto him, but it says they're supposed to bow and reverence Haman. And it seems like, from what I can gather from Persian understanding, that when an important person came by, you were supposed to bow to them. But if you were told to bow in reverence to them, then you were to treat them like a god. And that meant on your face in the ground, eat dust. Because that's the way you would treat one of your gods. And if that is true, then Mordecai has a problem here, because you should have no other gods before the one true God. And that's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego made their stance. That's where Daniel makes his stance. Here we are in the book of Esther, and we see another one standing up and saying, you know what? I can't do this. And it really doesn't matter what it costs me. But you'll notice the crowd gathered around wants to know, what's it going to cost him? Because that's the whole reason that they do this. That's verse 4. You tell me that you're a Jew, and a Jew can't reverence anybody like that, because only God gets worshipped. So it comes to pass, when they speak daily unto him, and they keep telling him that, they told Haman. Uh-oh. Isn't it interesting? I find it very interesting that Haman has been going in and out of the gate all the time. And you have all of these important folks that are doing business down there at the gate, and when they see Haman come walking by, they faceplant. Don't you think you'd notice the one person that didn't? I mean, maybe he was just so important looking around at all the people, and soaking up all the glory that he didn't pay that much attention. But it doesn't say when Haman noticed Mordecai didn't bow. It says when everybody else went to Haman and said, dude, this guy doesn't bow to you. And he says it's because he's a Jew. Now, they knew he was a Jew from Benjamite, a descendant of Kish. So everybody wants to know if being a Jew is a valid reason to disobey the king, which I think is interesting, because this is almost an old argument. Is there separation of church and state? Is there a real reason that the church can say, I don't have to obey the state in this area because... But it also tells me a great deal in his response here, because he didn't abstain out of pride. He doesn't abstain out of a personal grudge. He just tells them, I'm a Jew and I can't do that. He doesn't say, I'm not bowing to an Amalekite. I'm not bowing to There's nothing about that. There doesn't seem to be a rebellious attitude or contempt for the king's authority here. It simply is a matter of conscience. Only God is worshipped in that way. And after these guys, and notice it says day by day. The first day they don't run to Haman and ask him. They run to Mordecai and ask him. And he says, I am a Jew and I can only worship God. And the next day when good old Haman comes into work, everybody hits the dirt, and there's Mordecai standing there, and they all ask him again. And day after day after day. Why can't you? And then they start to think, well, if this really is a matter of your conscience, buddy, how far would you be willing to go? Let's tell Haman what's going on here, because he'll deal with it. Or he'll go and tell the king, and the king will deal with it. Will it stand? How far will Mordecai go? And will Ahasuerus accept it when he finds out? Because inevitably, if you're going to punish somebody for disobeying the king's going to find out, right? His pride has been offended. Look at verse 5. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not. Now that's interesting, because it doesn't say they had to come and tell him the next time. Now that he's aware of it, Haman can't walk through the gate without noticing that this guy refuses to bow. I mean, he notices it all the time. I wonder if he started making multiple trips in and out the gate just to see if anything was going to change. And the description here is, Haman was full of wrath. The word literally means exceedingly hot. The dude was furious. In chapter 5, verse 9, the description is full of indignation. Those two terms remind me of Nebuchadnezzar when they come and tell him that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego haven't bowed down. And it says the king was, he was mad. Because these people were supposed to be treating me like I'm a god, and this guy, or those three in Nebuchadnezzar's case, refused to treat me like a god. Who in the world are they to not treat me like a god? Haman is mad. Look at his response in verse 6. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone. In other words, he despised the idea of just taking it out on Mordecai. For they had showed him the people of Mordecai, wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. Get all of them. If the reason of being a Jew was good enough to disobey the king, then none of them would bow to him, and so it would be a constant thorn in his flesh. Everywhere that Haman goes in the kingdom, anywhere in the 127 provinces, people are supposed to hit the deck and bow and worship him. But everywhere he goes, every nasty little Jew's going to be standing there not bowing to him. So the only answer is, kill them all. Then everywhere he goes, guess what everybody's going to be doing? The only one not bowing to him would be Ahasuerus and his queen. I imagine he hated the Jews anyway, don't you? I mean, if he is a direct descendant of Agag, and Agag was hacked to pieces by Samuel, don't you think that that is a story that fueled generations of hatred? I mean, that's the kind of thing that if there were any Amalekites left, they'd be over there fighting the nation of Israel right now, and we'd be hearing about Amalekites just like we hear about Hamas and all the other stuff going on. But if you're going to have a big plot, you got to have big plans. And when you have big plans, you better not forget the one in charge of everything. Because every time Haman turns around thinking he has these guys and has sealed the deal, God just pulls the rug right out from underneath his feet. And he can't stand it because he somehow talked the king into making a command that everybody needs to treat him like a god. And you don't treat little gods that way, do you? But the one true God is going to show this guy who thinks he's a little god that you aren't even in control at all. In fact, you're just a pawn. And when this is all said and done, there will not be an Amalekite left on the face of the earth. And there won't be an Agagite either, because the whole family's going to get hung, right? God is going to accomplish the promise that he made years ago and that Israel has long forgotten about. Praises or prayer requests tonight?